What do you need to memorize for math? I actually, now I have different ideas about this, but I could be wrong. I don't know, but my view is that I think, I don't think that too often that memorization is not necessary in my view. In my view, obviously in some cases memorization is good, right? Because to some extent we memorize things to speak, right? We memorize things to in some cases, for example, an actor, like they're really good at memorizing things. So there are some cases where you have to, where it greatly benefits you to be able to memorize a speech. Believe it or not, even in negotiations or in, and somebody who can memorize answers and responses has an advantage, which I think is actually kind of unfair when you think about it, because it has nothing to do with, so if somebody is doing an interview, somebody who's really good at memorizing things can do really well beyond other people, even though they may not necessarily be, that has nothing to do with the work. So, but anyway, it has its place, right? Memorizing, as far as memorizing things, sometimes the memorization happens automatically just by doing something, right? Like just by you read something so many times or you do something so many times that you become, you just memorize it. You memorize the entire thing without even trying, and that kind of just comes from many years of doing something. But that's still even rare though, and it's not necessary either. But yeah, but what I mean is that sometimes you might memorize where every single fact about something, or about so that helps. But of course it's very specific, right? And it's very specific to whatever you're doing. But today I want to talk about math and what I think, in my view, when you do math, you should memorize. If I can get this, let's see if I can. Yeah, if we can memorize, when we do math, if we can, when we memorize things, it is something that you really only, I don't, as someone who I'm a mathematician, I use a lot of math, right? I've used it in calculating, I've created formulas, I've done all kinds of things. And in my view, I don't think it's essential. Although I would say, you should memorize. If I had to make a rule of things you have to memorize, obviously you should memorize kind of the multiplication tables, right? So the multiplication tables, I would say from 1 through 10, at least. Some people say 1 through 12. So basically, 1 times 1, 1 times 2, 1 times 3, all the way till 10, or 1 through 12, right? But the thing is, I don't think it's necessary to, in my view, I kind of prefer 1 through 10, even though some people do 1 through 12. And the reason why 1 through 10 is because 11 and 12 are kind of rare. You don't use it as much, but it's still worth knowing. And, 11 is kind of easy to learn, right? Because 2 times 11 equals 22. It's kind of easy to memorize, but it gets tricky when you do like 11 times 10. Like, I don't know. See, off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure what that is. It could be 132, right? I think. I don't know. But see, that's what I don't like. I don't like doing that. So like I said, I don't do the mental math. It's just not, I don't think it's essential. See, I don't know. I'm not sure. And so what I would do is I would actually just rather use the calculator to do this. Um, and so now, of course, when you're doing multiplication from 1 through 10, you probably don't need to use a calculator. But, you know, it's weird because when I'm doing math, I always use the calculator anyway. When I'm doing algebra, I mean, I'll use the calculator anyways, even just to do something like 2 times 4. Which I know is kind of ridiculous because some people would say, like, how can, you know, why wouldn't you just memorize it? And to me, it's because it's kind of a way of double checking yourself. You know, I know what the answer is, but you know what, let me just do it. And it's just a habit that I always built. And it emphasizes kind of the philosophy that I have, that mathematics, it's not about memorizing things. It really isn't. It's not about who can memorize the most. Mathematics is really about doing things precisely and getting the right answer. And so if that means slowing down, or if that means taking the, you know, using a calculator, like that's not a big deal. And checking yourself, checking your work, that's more important, to make sure that you actually understand what you're doing and that what you did was correct. So anyway, so back to the multiplication tables. I would say 1 through 10 is what I would do. And then I wouldn't worry about 11, 12. But what I would say is that you should be familiar with the 12 numbers, because they actually do come up quite frequently, especially in like algebra. If you're doing algebra, a lot of the 12, you should be familiar with the multiples of 12. You know, perhaps, you know, 12 times 12 equals 144. You should know that. Like, you should be familiar with it, but you don't have to memorize it. I would just use the calculator each time. And when you're doing algebra, you can use a calculator. So, but the calculator, of course, is not going to do everything, but it's meant for just doing the subtractions and multiplications more easily. And that's kind of the appropriate way to use the calculator with in algebra, right? Or and so you might think, like, why would you even bother to do? So that's one thing that I would memorize, is the multiplication tables 1 through 10. Now you might ask yourself, going back to what I was saying, why would you use, like, why would you want to even do calculations by hand, right? Like, why would you want to do that? And why is it okay? And in my view, I think it's okay because people used to use slider rules. I never got to use them. Slider rules are these, like, things. I don't know. I mean, I guess I've never really even used them. And it's crazy because people used to think, during the 1950s, people used to think that people would always use them. And yet, you know, they're obsolete, you know, with calculators. And it's kind of weird because I feel like we've actually regressed. Most people, they use calculators on their phone. And we do have scientific calculators on the phone now. You know, they have apps that are pretty advanced, but still, you know, the tactile feel of a calculator, I actually think we're regressing. It's a downgrade to me, to be honest with you. Most of the calculators are not very, I don't know, there's just something about touchscreen that just makes it less, it's not as quick and it's not as precise either. Although it's okay though. You know, there are some pretty good apps, some scientific calculator apps. So, you know, they're okay, I guess, but I still prefer kind of the TI-89, the TI-84, or no. What did we use in high school? Like TI-82, I think is what I used. But there's all kinds of calculators, and it's okay to use calculators in my view. But when you're doing the calculations, like, you shouldn't use, because there are calculators where it'll just do the entire math for you. But you should really learn how to do the calculations. In other words, the addition, the subtraction, the multiplication, and the division. So do those, but then, and then fractions, they have fraction calculators too. But then, anytime you're doing calculations, you know, you can use the calculator, but when it comes to the actual algebra or geometry, when it comes to the actual, you should do it by hand. in order to check what the work that you're doing. So generally speaking, you want to use, if you have a way of confirming what the answer is, you want to be able to do it by hand, using the calculators just to do the basic arithmetics, but everything else, you got to make sure you do it by hand, and that way you can make sure that what you did is correct, because sometimes a computer or calculator, you might type it in wrong and it might be wrong. And so by being able to do it by hand and comparing it with the calculator, it's just a way to double check. And it's so calculator. And it's so important that if you're a scientist, if you're doing math as a career, it's so important that you be able to confirm and do it by hand. So that's one case where I think calculators can be used. And again, you don't have to memorize. So I don't memorize, like I don't do mental math is what I'm saying. I don't memorize like arithmetic stuff. Like I can't do things off the top of my head, but I don't think it's necessary. It's okay. You don't have to do things off the top of your head. The other thing that I would say is when it comes to memorizing stuff in math is I think, I'm trying to think. Okay, so I got when it comes to formulas, see, that's something I don't think you need to memorize. I don't think we should memorize them. I mean, eventually you learn some of them, like the quadratic formula, but you really don't need to. I don't think you need. I think that should be de-emphasized. I don't think. I could be wrong about this, but I don't think, for example, I mean, is it really necessary to memorize the actual formulas? Or is it better to just understand what the formulas mean and which ones to get? Do you know? Isn't it better to just know? I would rather, I don't think that it's better to just have the formula and just have access to the formula, basically, and then just know when to use it. So if I give you a list of 20 formulas, you should know what each formula does. Obviously, you'd have to memorize that. But as far as learning what the actual formula is, I don't necessarily think it's necessary to memorize it, in my view. And I'm curious if anybody else, I don't know, do you really need to memorize the formulas to do calculus? Why can't you just have students, I just don't know. I don't think it's essential. It's better to just know what the formulas do and then apply them like that. And then I would rather that they focus more on the actual working out the problems rather than memorizing something that could just be written down. Do you know what I mean? And like I said, you could always check your work afterwards. So to confirm, a lot of times, for example, a lot of the formulas, once you understand what the formulas are, usually you're able to use a formula, let's say, and kind of cross-reference to something else. There's a reason why, the Pythagorean theorem, right? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Is that it? I hope that's right. I don't want to mess up here, but whatever. But the point is, so what I was saying is when we're doing math, it's not really essential to memorize it, I don't think, the formulas themselves. But the one thing that you definitely do need to memorize, and this is something that I guess it's not really something, it's something kind of a given, but you do need to memorize how the operations work. How, for example, how negative numbers work, how you memorize how negative numbers work. You memorize the all of the, for example, the attributes of arithmetic, the attributes of algebra, the way fractions are done. That is a form of memorization. See, now that to me is a legitimate memorization. That's where you should be using your memorizing. And it's not really even memorizing as much as learning. You're attempting to understand the relationship that the numbers have. And what math is basically algebra, for example. What constitutes in America algebra 1 and 2 are basically how the numbers relate to each other, and the relationship that, for example, a number, when it is divided, when it is multiplied or divided, and how that relationship, there's a certain relationship that comes with numbers that are added and subtracted and multiplied and divided. It's basically arithmetic, believe it or not, but it's understanding how to use it, and how to and this is where, when you add, subtract, multiply, or divide numbers or fractions or whatever it is, the same, there are certain sort of principles, there are certain associations that each of these operations have with each other, and you have to memorize how it works. You have to memorize what you can and can't do. And essentially the way you have to do it is you have to understand what you're doing. Basically, when you're, let's say I'm writing a formula, right? So x over y minus 3, you need to understand what this means. Like, what does that mean exactly? Right? And it's this number divided by this, and then subtract this. So you kind of have to memorize and understand. Or in this case, it's not really memorized. Well, it is memorizing, I guess, technically. But it's basically understanding what we're seeing here, what the symbols mean, and what exactly we're seeing, so that you can use, so you can understand how to implement and use this. And what it really boils down to is so that's something that you do need to memorize, and that's where the memory should be. I would rather people understand what they're doing, and it's tricky enough, actually, because at first, if you see math as something that's just random, it's not random, actually. It's every single operation, and it's not apparent at the beginning, but a lot of the stuff that you do in algebra are things that basically lead up to what you do in geometry or calculus. And so really it's just a preparation, but you don't know it. And I don't think you need to know either. Like, some teachers, they try to kind of introduce ideas early on. I'm sure, I think you can introduce some kind of basic, algebra and geometry, similar to an integrated mathematics course would do. But you want to keep it simple, because I actually think it's important that students learn how these operations work and become a master at this before you start doing the geometry, the trig, and the calculus. And so that's pretty much, I think, the two things we talked about was memorizing the multiplication table. That's kind of, I'm writing really bad right now. Multiplication tables, and memorizing just the operations, how the operations work. So for me, these two things, 1 and 2, these two things are what I think you should focus on memorizing. And I don't think that formulas are useful. And also, I don't think the arithmetic is useful either. Memorizing, for example, what is 59 minus 13, I guess you could use math tricks, but I don't think it's essential. Math tricks, so what I would say, the two things that, in my view anyway, and I'm curious what you all think about this, but in my view, memorizing formulas and memorizing math tricks, using math tricks, not really essential. You don't have to do it. If you enjoy it as a hobby, that's great, but I don't, and there may be some advantages, I guess, in some cases, in some use cases. But for the most part, I think to do math, you don't need to understand. You don't need to memorize formulas, or I should say, you don't. Or I'm trying to say, you don't need to do mental math. Okay, and I'm not very good at mental math. But I know some people who are, and so for some people, that's kind of it's useful. People find that useful. For me, I would rather actually just get pen and paper and just write. If I have to add something, I mean, obviously you can use a calculator, but I would also double check and just do the addition by hand. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do mental math. So if I did, if I did 501 plus 355, I would just do the math. Oops, sorry, I messed up there. 1 plus 5 equals 6. 0 plus 5 equals 5. 5 plus 3 equals 8. 856. And I probably shouldn't be doing math with pen. I know a lot of math teachers, they always corrected us with that, and I probably agree with that, actually. It's very messy to do it with a pen because it's very easy to make mistakes. Those are my thoughts on the things that you should, or that, that should be memorized, and other things that I don't think need to be memorized.